Sebastian. It's September, and that's basically when our year starts. My year really is September to September, and so I feel like it's a new year starting. So,
Yeah, it's also
how are you doing?
good. I mean, September is exciting because after the summer lull, that's when things can pick up again. Although, as we'll see, August was anything but a lull in carbon removal world. Yeah, excited to dig in.
Yeah, so with that, number one, you have, I just folded it over, store, baby, store. What's going on with storage?
I think, that's a theme for this month, is which is great that we're seeing projects actually getting going and storing CO2. And in this case, we're talking about Northern Lights, which is the biggest CO2 storage site in Europe. It's located in Norway. It has had billions and billions of investment by the Norwegian government. And it's where a lot of the European CO2, both from carbon capture and storage and from carbon dioxide removal, will end up. And it's flowing. So basically, it's almost 100 kilometers off the coast of Norway. They've got pipelines. So you deliver the CO2 to essentially a port. There it comes into storage tanks. There, via pipeline, it goes into this reservoir, which is 2.5 kilometers below the ground, and there it's stored. Has a capacity of 1.5 megatons per year in its first phase. And it's super exciting to see. I know a bunch of CDR projects that have storage agreements with Northern Lights. And so, yeah, CO2 is flowing.
I mean, that we'll talk about this later because there was a big, interesting article about storage, but I'll leave it to the end. Two, deep sky is the limit. Tell us about what's going on in Canada.
So Deep Sky is a really unique company in the carbon removal space. They're the first of its kind as far as I know. And they've gotten a lot of investment, a lot of attention, and I think for all the right reasons. Essentially what they figured out is we're not going to build another DAC company. We're going to create a place where DAC companies can set up shop, and we're going to provide them with all the infrastructure they need besides the technology itself. So they provide the renewable electricity, the storage options. They even sell the credits. Right. And what this allows them to do as well is to have several DAC companies operate side by side under the same conditions, which is super interesting because they'll get like the best A/B testing ever, right? To see what really works. And they've just gone live. They've got a bunch of DAC companies for their first, I don't know how many, but I know it's a handful for their first phase. I'm super excited about this because this is also a model that we see in Kenya, for example. There's discussions of a similar model in the Great Rift Valley, right, where they want to kind of provide essentially all these infrastructure components and have DAC companies come and set up shop. And this could be really successful in future. And more than anything, as an average CDR interested person, I'm really, really keen to see how these different technologies stack up against each other. And I'm sure that Deep Sky is essentially going to release some of that data over time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I now remember that where I was in Orkney, where they had something similar for tidal energy, and it was where tidal companies could experiment and plug into the grid with their projects out in the ocean. So, you were talking about how August didn't sleep for CDR. So number three, CDR had a big quarter, the biggest quarter ever.
Yeah, this is about Q2, but the report was released recently. No, but I put it in there because the report came out kind of in late July, and I'm not sure everyone saw it in the off season. But CDI FYI, go-to platform for anything related to the development of this market. Sign up to their summaries. They've got now monthly, quarterly, and yearly analyses, and they've essentially shown that in Q2, just in Q2, there've been more purchases than in all of CDR history before. So it's really quite significant, 15.5 megatons compared to 13.6 in all of history before. It's led by Microsoft, as so often, even more this time. Microsoft accounted for 94% of the deals. And what we're seeing more and more, which is, I think, rather interesting, is the purchases are more and more concentrated in BECCS and bio-CCS. So that's 90% of the deals. And the deliveries keep being heavily concentrated on biochar. Again, 89% of the deliveries, right? So we're kind of seeing BECCS really taking the purchases and biochar keep dominating the deliveries. But yeah, for anyone who just wants a snapshot of where the market is at, always recommend those reports.
And number four, the UK is business not as usual. And so, what exactly happened over there? Actually, we're talking about Bex also there. So, what happened?
Yeah, I mean, the UK has really picked up pace in the last few months. I mean, first, early in the year, they kind of announced that they're going to invest £22 billion into carbon capture and storage, but that includes CDR over 25 years, which is a lot, the biggest amount I've seen in Europe. Then, around a month and a half ago, we spoke about this. They announced their plans to integrate carbon removals into their emission trading system, into their compliance market. And they want to do it by 2029, which is 2 years before the EU. So again, that's pretty awesome. And now they've essentially released hundreds of pages of how they want to finance that integration and carbon removals. And it's essentially, they call it the business models for greenhouse gas removals, but it's essentially how to finance CDR. And it's focused on so-called carbon contracts for difference. So contracts for difference they've used in the past for renewables. The idea is you make a bilateral agreement with a provider of a certain good, in this case CDR, and you agree on a price. Say you are a DAX company and you agree on a price of £250 per ton. And then if you sell your DAX for less than 250, the government steps in with the rest. If you sell it for more than 250, you have to give it back to the government. And so these carbon contracts for difference is how they plan to essentially finance CDR. There's much more in there, but this is kind of, I guess, the single most interesting bit. And they want to do 15-year contracts, which is quite risky, I think, for a pretty novel technology, because you have to agree now on how much the right price should be in 15 years from now for a certain technology. But yeah, super interesting stuff.
That's interesting. That was the first thing I thought about is if you have a long-term contract for something that's changing in price, most likely given efficiencies and how everything's going to operate, but at least they're putting their money into the system, which I guess is the most important aspect of this. So, and also the EU's moving on a procurement program. So number 5, an EU CDR procurement program. How's that going to work?
So on the procurement program, they've essentially, again, we covered this in the past. In May, they had a workshop where they discussed how do we actually finance carbon removals. The CRCF, the kind of certification framework for carbon removals, is almost across the finish line. And they did an analysis and estimated that until 2030, 2031 ETS kicks in, other things will happen. But until then, carbon removal needs up to 6.7 billion of funding, euros. Where should that come from? How should we do it? And they had a workshop, and now they released, again, hundreds of pages of reports which go through the status quo of carbon removals today, that funding need. But probably the most interesting part for a policy nerd like myself is they go through all the different options of how it could be financed. And they land, to really simplify it, on a so-called removals fund. So an institution that would essentially could have private money in there as well, but mainly public money, that would purchase the removals and then feed them into different use cases, including potentially an emission trading system. It's all very interesting. The big question is, where does the money come from? The repo provides some answers of repurposing existing schemes like the Innovation Fund in Europe towards CDR, but there's no money yet. And I think that's the big caveat compared to something like the UK or Germany or others. It's great on paper, but there's no money yet.
And it's again going to probably have to weather the fierce argument that why pay for that? Why not pay for more renewables? Wind and solar, right?
That's the problem with the Innovation Fund. It's 40 billion a year, essentially, not a bit less, but there's billions and billions that are going towards clean tech and green transition in Europe every year. But every technology, every solution is saying we should be the ones getting that money. And so the suggestion, this is where the money should come from for CDR, is basically what every other innovation is also saying. So yeah, it's a contested space.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And speaking of contested spaces, the ocean, especially in regards to removals, number 6, you're talking about MCDR is all grown up. So marine carbon removal is evolving. And in what way are they allowed to? I know that Planetary is doing really well, but what's happening?
Yeah, they just did a nice deal. I mean, first, marine CDR is a tricky term because it encompasses such a broad variety of different approaches, right? And so I can see why we're using it right now and also using it to gather companies, but they have fundamentally different things and maturity levels and technologies. But here it's about the foundation of what's called the MCDR Coalition. It's managed by the Carbon Business Council, and it's essentially for the first time, I would say, a platform for marine CDR companies to gather and to advocate together, which I think is great. I founded a similar platform with others for enhanced weathering, the Enhanced Weathering Alliance, right? The Global South CDR Alliance more recently. Like, I'm a big fan of essentially picking niches that require more exposure and advocacy and give them a platform to team up and do that work. And so, yeah, I'm sure that this is going to help the MCDR cause.
Yeah, and for those of you, I mean, most people that listen to this are well versed in CDR, but the difference between kelp and ocean alkalinity enhancement is vast. So,
Vast.
very different. Yeah. Okay, so now talent. Okay, talent. We need a lot of talent in CDR. Lots of openings, right? So, chance to snap up some amazing talent. Number 7,
Yeah, this is actually about
Noya.
first some bad news. A tech company called Neue from the West Coast essentially went bust. And I mean, it's good remembering that there's almost 200 direct air capture companies, right? And there will be consolidation. It's a tough time out there right now, not just for carbon removal, but for climate more broadly. And so I think we can expect this not to be the last company. But what we did at CDR Jobs, which I'm obviously also involved in, is we essentially worked with Noya on a spotlight of their talent and the different people that are looking for new positions that are coming from Noya. And now, if you are looking for people, it's a good time because you can get highly qualified people who have spent years on CDR, years working on direct air capture. And yeah, that might not be the case in a couple of years from now when the talent space might be undersupplied. So an appeal to people to check out those profiles and see if they're a match for them.
Yeah, I didn't realize there were that many DAC companies.
There are a lot.
And on to number 8, the carbon market catcher. Number 8, carbon market catcher. Alice O'Keefe is a spotlight for you this month.
I wanted to highlight her because she does a really great job at doing a weekly roundup on LinkedIn of kind of key news. And again, my Giga Ten here is a monthly roundup, right? She does a weekly one, and it's definitely one of the pieces of information that I kind of consume regularly. So make sure to follow her and just check out her weekly summaries because they give you a really good overview of what's been happening in the carbon markets and carbon removal space.
Awesome. I will put her URL in the end of this. And number 9, Scoop Schools in Session. More information on CDR for those of you who don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we've been busy creating content. So at the CDR Policy Scoop, the podcast that I run with Eva, over the summer, we took time to actually launch a new format called Scoop School. And it's a format where I learn from Eva or Eva learns from me on topics that we're particularly knowledgeable about, but that definitely have a lot of interest beyond us too. So we did 2 Scoop Schools, one on carbon removal accounting. That's where Eva lectured me on everything relating to essentially greenhouse gas inventories and how governments can and cannot account for carbon removals today, which is something that I definitely had a blind spot on. And then I had the pleasure of giving Eva essentially an overview of the leaders and laggards of CDR. So kind of a global overview in half an hour, global overview of what countries are leading, lagging, trying to catch up. So yeah, if you're interested in those 2 topics, make sure to check it out.
Will do. We'll put that URL in the end of this as well. Number 10, your CDR Big Apple Climate Week guide, which I was making use of actually. So
it's really good.
It's got some good stuff. Yeah, I noticed.
I got even more FOMO because I'm not going to Climate Week, but I did look through the calendar that Isometric made, and I was like, boy, this is really useful for folks. And there's so many events this year. Like every year when I check out these calendars, there's more events. And so anyone going to New York for Climate Week, make sure to check out Isometric's calendar and have fun. Don't have too much fun without me, but have fun.
I will be having fun. I will go for the first part of that week. Nice. I have an 11th one this time, which I'm sure you saw on LinkedIn. Robert Hoagland put in the article about a prudent planetary limit for geologic carbon storage. Did you see that?
I did.
And it was this. So I figure we should probably talk about it more at length next month because
it's quite fresh.
It's another. Yeah, it's quite fresh, but I just want to bring it up. So this paper is basically saying or challenging this notion that there's as much storage that's safe meaning doesn't leak, et cetera, than the industry is claiming. And so they're saying it's a lot less. And so I don't know what your initial response is. I'm not going to hold you to it because I know everyone has to digest what this means and what it was and who these people were.
I mean,
Yeah.
I haven't read the paper, but I've read analyses,
Hmm.
and the one
Yeah.
that I looked was particularly happy to see Jack Andreassen's analysis. He's the CCS guy for me,
Hmm.
and his response, a couple of things that he highlighted, which I thought were interesting. One was that they only looked at a couple of types of geological reservoirs.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
that was the first thing. The second thing was that they essentially did a lot of modeling to see what the minimum could be and what factors could reduce the volume of available storage space, but they didn't do the opposite. They never looked at what could actually increase the potential amount of storage space.
Interesting.
And so he had a couple of points, but his punchline was this was basically an analysis of what the minimum worst case could be, not essentially what an overall realistic assessment or middle ground could be. That's what I have for now. I'll definitely have to dig up more information on it before we chat next time. But yeah, definitely it caused some waves in the industry.
I saw that, and I think the number one critique, which I read too, was that they were looking at it very narrowly and not looking at some of the. I don't even think they were looking like in places like Oman, or in other places that are doing it differently, or how you can enhance it. Which I know that a lot of these companies, like Sella and 4401, are looking at different ways to mineralize carbon in these places. So yeah. Anyway,
And another thing, even the
it's
number that they
yeah,
come up with is
yeah,
40 years worth of all emissions of humanity. So it's still a
okay,
lot of it's still a lot, right? It was
yeah,
1.5 trillion
yeah,
tons or what it was. So it's still a huge
yeah.
amount, and it's probably on the low end from what I read in the analysis. But if we can use that, that's that's a good start.
It's still, that's the other thing. I said, well, actually, you're making the argument for it at the end, even if it's on the low end. Anyway, but yeah, it just tells me that we're on for a very gritty and substantial year of work because I think the devil's in the details as it always is. And I'll be doing more interviews on energy and just systems as well as doing my movie on trees, which is coming along nicely. So nature
Exciting.
removals primarily through. Yeah, I'm excited. So onward and upward. Take care,
Thanks,
Sebastian. I'll
Leila.
see you in October.
See you in
Yeah.
October.
Bye.